We begin our story by seeing a young man with dark hair fighting against goblins. This young man is our protagonist named Yotsuya, who greatly enjoys killing goblins. While doing so, he remembers that this world is much more fun and exciting than his own world, or rather, his real life. After that, we go back in time a bit to when the protagonist's life was still boring, as he was just a lonely student without friends in his school. After a normal day at school, it's his turn to do classroom chores, like cleaning the blackboard and arranging the chairs. As he does this, he watches a very popular girl named Shindou and her friend. The girls notice that he's looking at them, so he becomes embarrassed and continues with his tasks as they leave. But something happens when he's alone in the classroom. Suddenly, Yotsuya feels the atmosphere change, and flower-like figures start appearing on the chalkboard until it's filled with them. Beneath him, a glowing circle appears, and he starts being transported to another place, which takes him by surprise, as evident from his expression. After that, we see the boy appearing in the sky and falling, landing in a lake where there's a monster that's unknown to him until now. Yotsuya quickly escapes from there, terrified and confused by what just happened. The sound of his frightened groans alarms two girls who appear there. When Yotsuya sees them, he realizes they are Shindou and her friend, which surprises him even more than where he was. Both girls approach him, and Shindou's friend introduces herself as Hakozaki. Yotsuya gets up and tries to ask them what's going on, but Shindou interrupts him, telling him that a man will appear now. At that moment, the figure of a man with half a head suddenly appears out of nowhere. He introduces himself as Game Master and starts talking to Yotsuya about a mission he must fulfill. The protagonist tries to ask this strange entity questions, but Shindou repeatedly silences him so he pays attention to the instructions. Game Master also mentions to Yotsuya that Shindou is a wind sorceress and Hakozaki is a swordsman. He tells Yotsuya that he will grant him a power. The man conjures a roulette, and while the girls hope for something good, Yotsuya ends up being assigned the role of a simple farmer. Game Master bids them farewell and wishes them luck. The girls are a bit disappointed, but they decide to continue their way. Shindou explains how they ended up there and the missions Game Master had them complete. Then they show Yotsuya how to use the inventory. He becomes interested but can only produce farmer's tools, which seem useless. The three of them continue walking through a forest and find a shining circle the girls call a record. It turns out this is a memory of something that happened in that place. However, as it's from Shindou's friend's past, she doesn't let them see it. While they're there, goblins appear and start attacking them. When Yotsuya tries to defend himself, his farmer's tool breaks. Shindou uses her magic, but it doesn't harm the monsters since her level and power are low. Now Hakozaki is too scared to do anything, so Yotsuya decides to attack with another tool that also breaks. Now it's the enemy's turn. The goblin easily hits Yotsuya on the head and kills him. Later, Yotsuya wakes up and sees his motionless body. After a few seconds, he revives and can move on his own again. Upon waking up, Shindou explains that when they die, they can revive after 30 seconds. So they take advantage of this to plan another attack, this time working together. They manage to kill a goblin, though Yotsuya dies again in the fight. When Yotsuya revives after 30 seconds, the girls congratulate him as their plan worked. They explain that despite reviving every 30 seconds, if all three of them die simultaneously, they'll die in real life. This confession leaves the protagonist somewhat traumatized. They also tell Yotsuya that he can ask Game Master a question. The questions they asked revealed that someone who knew them sent them there and that they come from a distant future. When night falls, the protagonist hunts some goblins and suddenly hears noises in their camp. Upon returning to see what's happening at the source of the noises, he notices that everything is on fire and sees a monster devouring Shindou. Yotsuya grabs Hakozaki and takes her away. Later, they realize that, for now and for an unknown reason, Shindou won't revive, so they head to the village to continue their journey and save her later. When they arrive at the village chief asks them to take care of a troll monster, the same one that attacked them. Both of them accept the mission, but the protagonist decides to go alone, without Hakozaki, to not risk his life, all while thinking about how this world is much more enjoyable than his real life. Later, we see a memory of the protagonist, where the three of them were at the riverbank resting and drinking water. Shindou asked them about their goals in the real world, something that excited Hakozaki a lot but didn't interest the protagonist at all since he doesn't like his real life. Back in the present, the protagonist is in the middle of the forest looking for monsters to defeat and rank up. But in the midst of some bushes, he stumbles upon a record. Yotsuya touches the record, and it starts showing a memory of when his two companions were there. They talk about boys from their school and whom they would prefer to be there. Hakozaki mentions one who is good good at training, but Shindou says a name, which surprises him, and he remembers that there's another boy with his name. After this, the memory cuts off, and the protagonist doesn't know who Hakozaki was referring to in the memory. The protagonist starts to think that maybe one of them will confess their love to him in the future, but his thoughts are interrupted as a group of goblins arrives. He decides to attack them to level up as he initially intended. Yotsuya starts to remember that he was happy in his real life when he was a child, as he had friends and lived in a nice place. But that changed when they moved to the city. He stays there, so these bitter memories make him even more furious, and he attacks the goblins, defeating almost all of them, with only one managing to escape. The boy thinks of calming down, and when he does, he sees that the village is on fire. Therefore, Yotsuya rushes to see what happened and arrives to find that no one is in the village. Everything is in ruins due to the troll attacking and destroying everything in its path. While checking the rubble, he finds a record of Hakozaki's, which shows her training since she felt like a burden to others and explains her situation, which appears quite sad to the protagonist. When the monster started attacking, she bravely confronted it, trying to protect the others. However, she ended up being eaten by the troll. Yotsuya reflects on this, realizing that he wasn't the only one going through a tough situation. He regrets leaving her alone, especially since the last thing Hakozaki said was his name while seeking help. As Yotsuya laments, the troll reappears, prompting him to run away to avoid dying. As if he does, all three of them would have died, leading to their permanent deaths in the real world. Although Yotsuya runs non-stop, the troll catches up to him, attacks him, and throws him far away. But the boy doesn't give up. Thinking about Hakozaki's situation, he decides to keep fighting to help her. The protagonist starts thinking about an intelligent way to attack the monster. However, due to its size and high level, he can't find a solution other than leveling up. Just in front of him, he sees the goblin that had escaped earlier. So, he uses one of his tools to kill it, and when he does, he reaches rank 10, causing time to momentarily stop. At that moment, Game Master appears and talks to him. The man congratulates him on leveling up and tells him that he's earned another ability. He spins the roulette, and the protagonist hopes for something combat-related. However, he realizes that the new ability he gets is the role of a cook. Game Master leaves the scene, and the protagonist notices that he now has a kitchen knife in his inventory. He uses it to defend himself from the troll. He also realizes that he can see its intestines and decides to attack its stomach where his friend is likely digested. When time unfreezes, the troll collapses, and the protagonist uses the kitchen knife to open its stomach, freeing and reviving his two companions. When the three are together, they decide to launch a joint attack on the monster, but it doesn't work. After several deaths, the protagonist devises a plan that eventually leads to them killing the troll. At that moment, Game Master appears again and congratulates them. He boosts their abilities and asks the protagonist for his question. Yotsuya asks about what will happen after they complete the assigned missions. Game Master gives him a glimpse of the future, in which the city where they live is attacked, and they are the ones who can stop the monster's assault. Right after this vision, they reappear in the classroom, as if they had never left. They talk about what happened for a bit and then leave. While walking with Hakozaki, they discuss helping each other since the future of the city depends on them. When Yotsuya is alone, he thinks that now he's defending the city he disliked so much. Once again, the protagonists enter the magical world, which they can now access effortlessly. Upon arrival, they face a monster and defeat it, obtaining a memory in return. It's a memory of when Hakozaki had just arrived in that world. This time, the two of them managed to kill a goblin. However, in the memory, Shindou's behavior when they kill it is revealed. She hugs Hakozaki, seeking comfort, a side of her that she hadn't shown before. Seeing this, Shindou, embarrassed, interrupts the memory, but it's too late. The protagonist had already witnessed it. After that, we see Shindou in the girls' changing room, texting Hakozaki. They talk about the protagonist and how mysterious he is. At night, Yotsuya runs through the city while contemplating the fact that he now has to defend it, even though he despises it. He receives a call from Game Master, whose voice is different this time. Game Master gives him a mission in the real world to flirt with a girl from another school. Yotsuya has to go to that school immediately. Yotsuya leaves to fulfill the mission he was just given. When he arrives at the designated school, he manages to infiltrate it following Game Master's instructions. He ends up in the girls' bathroom, where three girls are filming another girl on the ground. The protagonist is unsure of what to do in this embarrassing situation. However, he determines that he should help the girl with glasses on the floor. He takes the phones from the others and breaks them to prevent them from publishing the video. The three girls leave, calling him a harasser. Yotsuya stays with the girl with glasses, named Yuka, who is skeptical of him but still thanks him for his help. Later, Yotsuya accompanies Yuka down the street until they part ways. She gives him advice on how to attract girls. After a few days of investigating, the protagonist is suddenly transported to the magical world again, where Yuka also appears. Game Master shows up and welcomes the new girl. He grants her a fire magic ability and informs them that reviving now takes 40 seconds. Later, the girls start providing information about the world, and Yuka mentions that her school labeled the protagonist as the bathroom harasser. The girls get angry at this. They receive a new mission to explore the territory, so they split up to do so. Shindou and Yuka remain together. Yuka examines Shindou's personality and behavior and concludes that she's the kindest person she knows. Yuka explains the confusion with the protagonist, how she falsely accused him to avoid being bothered. Afterward, the four meet up in a meadow. Yotsuya realizes that the girls are avoiding him, making him feel condemned by them. Suddenly, a lifeless giant bird monster falls from the sky. The group finds this curious. However, a centipede emerges from the bird and attacks them, releasing smaller centipedes. Yotsuya kills the protagonist, and Yuka seizes the opportunity to do something. However, her magic power is too low, and she can't do anything before the monster kills her as well. When the protagonist revives, he manages to kill the smaller centipedes. The girls notice his strength, and even Yuka starts finding him somewhat attractive. Then the protagonist attacks the giant centipede, cutting its legs and leaving its body writhing on the ground. He asks Hakozaki for help to finish it off. She takes out her sword, and the protagonist guides her hands to kill the centipede together. When they succeed, everyone's ranks go up. We then see a memory of Shindou. The memory shows Shindou as a child, defending herself against a boy who bullied her. A girl approached her, and they became friends. Her name was Sayuri. One day, Sayuri died, which not only saddened Shindou but also motivated her to be helpful and kind to others. Later, Shindou wakes up in a forest camp and sees the protagonist training. As he approaches her, they discuss the memory where she was crying. This embarrasses Shindou a bit, but she seizes the opportunity and holds the protagonist's hand, asking for his help with something. Now Shindou explains that when she was just a girl, she was known as a troublesome girl, but she was actually defending herself from other kids who wanted to mock her. That changed one day when she met an older girl named Sayuri, who motivated her to change and became her friend. What Shindou didn't know was that her friend Sayuri was facing harassment, and people made fun of her. This led her to take her own life. This tragic loss deeply saddened Shindou, who also had to face bullying from others, as people pointed fingers at her due to her father being a bad person. Her friends helped her make progress, so she continued to strive to become strong and not let others lead her to the same fate as Sayuri. In summary, the girl asks Yotsuya for help to leave this world that had treated her so badly. This surprises the protagonist a bit, but the other girls who are listening lying down find it somewhat cheesy. The next day, the four of them set out to investigate the village that was attacked previously, but they only find ruins. A man with a carriage arrives and informs them that the village was destroyed 4 years ago, leading them to realize that time passes very differently in that world. The man then mentions that the place they are looking for is very far away, so they need horses. He tells them about a tournament where the winner will receive 3 horses. The group finds this information opportune, so they decide to participate in the tournament. On their way, they encounter a band of kidnappers who are human, so they can't kill them. They try to escape, but the men capture Shindou. The protagonist suggests continuing with the tournament as a way to help Shindou without risking all 4 of their lives. Yuka doesn't understand this, so she goes with Hakozaki, claiming they will save their friend. However, the kidnappers capture them both and tie them up with the other kidnapped girl. Yotsuya realizes this and continues fighting alone, killing some goblins. This helps him rank up until Game Master appears again and grants him a new ability. It's called Biological Mage, which the protagonist doesn't know the purpose of. Despite that, he decides to continue with the tournament in hopes of saving his companions. When the tournament begins, he dies in his first battle. He is defeated by a knight named Kahabal, and while waiting to revive, he feels embarrassed that the battle lasted only 5 seconds. When Yotsuya revives, Kahabal approaches him. She takes off her helmet, revealing herself to be an attractive blonde girl. She's impressed by Yotsuya's ability to revive and recognizes him as a hero. They start a conversation, during which Yotsuya explains to Kahabal that he urgently needs to get to the other city to complete a mission, and he asks for help in finding horses. Kahabal understands his situation and suggests killing a big monster to obtain a horse. However, Yotsuya considers it difficult. He then comes up with the idea of revealing the kidnapper's location. Kahabal agrees and asks Yotsuya to indicate where the hideout is. He does, and she offers him a horse as a reward if he helps catch them. This gives him hope. Afterward, he leaves with Kahabal, and they talk about sword training. She offers to give him lessons, and despite not being good at sports in school, he puts in the effort. Later, the army, led by Kahabal and accompanied by the protagonist, goes to find the bandits. When the army arrives, they defeat the bandits easily. However, the bandits open massive doors and release a giant humanoid monster. The bandits flee in fear, and everyone realizes that the monster is a berserker, a sinister creature. Kahabal gets excited to fight it and wields her massive sword, eager to cut the monster down. She battles the monster, and it knocks her sword away. Just before the berserker can attack her, the protagonist intervenes, injuring the monster and using magic to distract it. The berserker shifts its focus and attacks the protagonist, killing him with a single blow. While distracted, Kahabal manages to decapitate it. Afterward, they finish clearing the hideout and free the kidnapped girls, taking them back to the village. As a gesture of gratitude, Kahabal's father lends the protagonist a carriage to take them to the other city, agreeing to the proposition Kahabal had made about training all four of them. When everything is ready, they say their goodbyes and begin the journey, now with a man and Kahabal as their companions. While they are traveling, Hakozaki is lost in thought, reflecting on how much her life has changed in this world. She recalls that back in school, due to her illness, she couldn't participate in any sports, which affected her final grade in physical education. This frustration led her to study pharmacy with the goal of finding a cure for her illness. She aimed to study hard and earn a scholarship since her parents couldn't afford private education. This was her path, and she pursued it peacefully. However, everything changed when she arrived in this world. Instead of peace, strength and violence are necessary to survive here. She remembers how much it impacted her when they were rescued, and all the kidnappers were killed. She saw a pile of corpses, and while the others seemed unfazed, she felt different emotions. So, while they rest by a campfire at night, Hakozaki ponders over these memories. Afterward, the group continues their journey without significant events until evening falls again, and they stop at some ruins to rest and have a meal. The protagonist prepares a dish using his cooking skills, impressing everyone with how delicious it turns out. However, Hakozaki can't bring herself to eat any of it, as the memory of how the kidnappers were killed disturbs her. She talks to Shindou, who encourages her and reveals her intention to protect others. Afterwards, Kahabal approaches the protagonist and reminds him that they need to train. Yuka finds this insistence odd, and the protagonist explains that he enjoys cutting meat and can do so with them since they revive as heroes. This scares the girls, but he manages to convince them to participate in this peculiar training. He starts with Yuka, then takes Hakozaki and helps her practice sword moves. As night falls, some of the knights who accompany them arrive and inform them that they were attacked by goblins. The protagonist uses his newfound biological magic to heal them, and the next day they train for combat. After a while of traveling, they encounter a village of goblins. Yotsuya decides to practice with his companions, so they approach the goblins and start attacking them. During the battle, Hakozaki manages to kill her first goblin. Though she finds it gruesome and is saddened by it, the rest carry out their mission without hesitation. Later that night, Kahabal explains to everyone her fondness for cutting meat and goes off to patrol, hoping to find something to kill. The following day, the journey continues. While in the carriage, it falls into a hole and gets stuck. After a great effort, they manage to free it. They hear the sounds of a fight and watch as monsters attack people. Yotsuya suggests moving on, but Hakozaki disobeys and chooses to help the victims. She believes that as a hero, it's her duty to assist everyone in need. The protagonist changes his mind and joins her. They arrive and begin fighting the wolves, but the outcome is both of their deaths. When Hakozaki revives, she realizes she needs to become stronger to protect others. She attracts the attention of a wolf monster, draws her long sword, and manages to kill it when it attacks. The protagonist notices her increased strength. He makes the last wolf chase her until they reach the carriage, where Kahabal emerges and beheads the wolf. Later, the protagonist decides to help the wounded victims of the wolf monsters by using his biological magic to heal them. He explains that he extracted energy from the wolves' corpses. He then asks who they are and where they are headed. 3 of them reveal that they are knights from another village and are escorting 3 prisoners for execution. The most disturbing part is that one of the prisoners is a child. This raises concerns within the group and prompts Yotsuya to question what's right, to let them be executed for their sins or to help them escape, regardless of their crimes, in order to save their lives. Yotsuya continues pondering on how to act in this situation as he's unsure what's the right course of action. At that moment, Kahabal believes that the decision lies with the king of the city. Executing those people is not right, but he couldn't make the decision for the king, though he could decide for himself. Thus, he starts to argue with the leader of the knights to prevent the execution. As they are about to start fighting, the protagonist intervenes and suggests they not fight and calls the heroes to a meeting. In this meeting, he explains that he's unsure about the best decision. Defending the condemned might lead to losing points for attacking other humans, and not intervening might lead to losing points for not helping the innocent. So, faced with this controversy, they decide to travel with them while they ponder the best course of action. Later, they begin their journey, and the protagonist and his companions start investigating further. First, they talk to one of the condemned and ask for the reason they're facing execution. The old man replies that it's because the king banned his religion, and he belongs to it. After the evening passes, they talk to the leader of the knights, and he claims that the king is good and just. He mentions that the king renewed some laws that help the people but harms smaller villages. The protagonist understands the point, but Yuka doesn't, and she starts questioning the king's decisions, accusing him of being a dictator who doesn't care about others. This upsets the man, but before a fight breaks out, Yotsuya agrees with the man, calming the situation. The next day, Kahabal trains with Shindou to improve her sword skills. Later, everyone discusses the remaining distance of their journey, and the leader of the knights suggests taking a shortcut he knows through a nearby mountain that they approach quickly. By unanimous decision, they agree to take the shortcut. As they start ascending the steep path, the protagonist and one of the knights have to push the carriage uphill, showcasing their strength. After a while, they reach the entrance of a dark cave. Here, the leader of the knights and others, along with the condemned, leave the scene, claiming they need to activate the mechanism. When they leave, doors open, revealing a large hole with a giant water mechanism in the middle. The mechanism activates, and a platform starts rotating, but then the door closes, trapping them. The leader of the knights mentions that he can't travel with them any longer and set up that trap for this reason. Nevertheless, the protagonist and the girls decide to continue since if they pass through this path, they might catch up to them again. They start passing through the rotating platform and reach a section with swinging hammers. Yotsuya figures out how to stop them and does so by standing in a specific spot and moving a pillar, allowing them to pass through. Later, they arrive at a passage that doesn't seem to have traps, so the protagonist goes first just to be safe. As he does, he's pushed by a wall into a high hole and loses his life. He resurrects inside and tells the girls to continue without him. Observing the wall's behavior, Hakozaki discerns a movement pattern, allowing them to devise an exact strategy for passing through. Shindou is the first to attempt it, and when she succeeds, the other girls follow suit, including the carriage. Later, they arrive at what seems like an arena, and right in front of them, they see a seemingly petrified monster connected suspiciously to tubes. Kahabal recognizes the monster as a gargoyle, a highly dangerous creature. While they cautiously observe it, the monster is disconnected, and before the group can react, it starts moving. Now we see Yotsuya trapped in the hole as he searches for a way to climb the walls, creating holes where he can fit his feet and hands. He manages to start making those openings and desperately climbs. However, when he reaches a certain height, he falls, and despite repeating the climb, he falls multiple times, losing his life. Nevertheless, he doesn't give up and keeps pushing, showing perseverance. After a while, the light that was illuminating his surroundings goes out, so he starts working in the dark. While doing so, he thinks about how things were in his real life. He was new in school, had no friends, and other kids avoided him because they didn't want to do group activities with him. All these thoughts that bring bitter memories motivate him to keep fighting and climbing the wall despite the continuous falls. Eventually, he manages to climb high enough to reach the top and becomes very excited about this achievement. He mentions that Game Master designed it so that escape wasn't possible, but he managed it. Now it's time for the protagonist to walk through the dark corridors of the place, trying to find the way out by feeling the walls. Accidentally, he stumbles and falls to the ground, which ends up helping him as when he gets up, he sees the light of a register. When he touches it, he realizes it's the same register that belonged to the knight who pushed him. He passes it and finds out that the man has died. In the register, the girls are seen crying and bidding farewell to the knight, which also saddens him as he considered him a good comrade despite everything. Nevertheless, Yotsuya gets up as he needs to continue his journey while thinking that perhaps his fate is to always be unknown to the world. Returning to the group from which the protagonist had separated, the gargoyle monster heads towards the girls to attack them with its sword and eliminate them. They get scared seeing the giant monster heading their way, but they prepare to attack and defend themselves nonetheless. A numerous group of bats summoned by the gargoyle attack our girls, but they aren't strong enough to harm them, so the girls easily kill them with their swords. However, they become a nuisance as they prevent them from focusing on attacking the gargoyle. As the enemy gets closer, the girls start attacking with their swords to try to harm it, but the monster's skin proves to be too tough, and their weapons are ineffective. When Kahabel sees Shindou's sword movements, she's surprised and compliments her on being skilled with it. Shindou mentions that it's because she used to play a sport called tennis in her world. Kahabel suggests that she should continue doing it, and this prompts Shindou to recall how her coach used to make her feel inadequate for the sport. However, her friend's words motivate her, and she responds that she will. At that moment, the monster stabs the knight in the stomach with its sword arm and throws her into the void. This scares Shindou and makes her sad. She starts moving backward to stay out of the gargoyle's reach, but a bat flies towards her. She defends herself by attacking and eliminates it. Everything stops mysteriously, and Shindou remembers that the protagonist had told her that this happened when he leveled up. Now it's Game Master's turn to appear, and he grants her a new swordsman ability that she will use when time unfreezes. She attacks the monster with all her might, but it continues to defend and resist with its tough skin. Observing the monster's movements, Shindou remembers a piece of advice Kahabel gave her, which was to find the weak point of the opponent to defeat it. She detects the gargoyle's weak spot and rushes to attack it with her sword. The attack fails as the monster cuts off her arm. She lets out a deafening scream but manages to climb onto its shoulders. She then grabs her severed arm, using it to steady her sword, and drives it into the monster's neck, reaching its heart and causing the monster to shut down permanently. Returning to the protagonist's perspective, we see him running desperately and joyfully as he spots a hint of light at the end of the corridor he's been walking through. He also sees that according to the radar, his companions should be very close. He starts reflecting on everything that has happened since he was a child and wonders why he was chosen to go to this world. He believes that if he was chosen to be a leader, he must fulfill that role. He arrives at the arena where his friends are, and he must prove his leadership. Seeing the girls, he notices that Shindou has just killed the monster. They inform him that Kahabel has been thrown into the void, but at the end of it, there's water, prompting Yotsuya to quickly jump in to rescue her without hesitation, successfully bringing her to the surface. Later, Kahabel wakes up, and everyone is relieved. She checks her wound and sees that it has already healed. The others explain what happened to her. They inform her that the protagonist extracted energy from the monster's blood to heal her, and when he succeeded, he became very exhausted. Since that moment, he's been sleeping without moving. Kahabel ponders what the boy did. He had demonstrated his leadership and a compassionate heart. When they are alone, she kisses him, showing her affection. At that point, the other girls enter and are surprised by what they see. Later, Shindou is alone with the protagonist, who is still asleep. He wakes up suddenly, saying that he made a mistake. Hearing him, the other girls enter, and he explains that he might have been wrong about the condemned, as they might not have had anything to do with the mission. The girls think that everything was in vain, but Hakozaki decides to keep helping the innocent. The protagonist sees it as a possibility, but he's still unsure about the true meaning of that mission, so they propose to split up. The protagonist suggests to the team that the best approach is to form two groups, one to save the condemned and the other to fulfill the mission of searching for other goods, in order to determine which of the two missions is the correct one. They all gather around a campfire, and Yotsuya tells them that he and Shindou can't be in the same group due to being the strongest, so they need to choose teams. With little time remaining, they divide into groups, and Group A consists of Shindou with Hakozaki and the knight named Makua. Group B is formed by Yotsuya, Yuka, and Kahabel. Now we see how Team A advances to another location in search of the other goods for the mission. Team B follows the knights who have the condemned prisoners, and they come up with a plan to free them. However, Kahabel mentions that they can't attack them just like that, as it could trigger a war that would harm their village. This prompts the protagonist to think of a more effective way to deceive them, making them believe that they are allies. The next day, they manage to locate the carriage, and the protagonist explains to the girls his plan to put it into action at night. Upon hearing it, the girls tell him that it's quite malicious to come up with such plans. When night falls, the protagonist and Yuka approach their carriage, which alarms the knights. However, the protagonist assures them that he comes in peace. He then begins to explain that he's here to negotiate, as his fellow heroines have died. He treats the girl poorly, calling her Four Eyes, due to her glasses, to demonstrate that he has changed. Yotsuya tells the leader of the knights that he has now converted to the religion of the condemned and asks them to release him. He threatens that if they don't, he will convince all the villages to follow him and create a new religious movement. Although the knights find this alarming, they seem to believe him, so the protagonist gives them until the next day to decide. side. Later, the enemies consider attacking the protagonist without waiting for the day he gave them to consider his proposal. However, Yuka arrives just in time and offers to provide information to capture the hero, citing the way he mistreats her as a reason to assist them. The knights can't deny this, having witnessed it themselves. She manages to convince them and persuades 2 of them to leave with her, leaving only one to guard the carriage. While walking through the field, the men grow impatient and ask Yuka when they will reach their destination. She responds that it will be soon, but they don't believe her and decide to kill her. One of them searches the area to find the protagonist, but he doesn't succeed. When he returns, he ties up the revived girl and takes her back to join the other prisoners. Upon arriving at the carriage, they notice the protagonist there, setting it on fire, with several bodies on the ground that appear to be hanged. One of the bodies moves, and he finishes it off by setting it on fire as well. The 2 men are astonished, and the girl explains that he isn't part of their religion. Instead, he sought revenge for his companions, which is why he killed them all. She escapes with him on a horse. Both knights are outraged and realize they can't return to the city, as the king would surely punish them for this negligence. Meanwhile, Yotsuya speaks with Yuka, saying that their plan seems to have worked well. They arrive at a cave where the 3 condemned prisoners are. The child has awakened, so the 3 of them thank the protagonist for saving them and discuss the recent events. Yotsuya leaves and talks with Yuka about the plan of using dolls to make it seem like the others were dead, and they only took the other knight's life. He emphasizes the value of those people's lives, and the girl asks him about the value of her life and the lives of her other companions to him. He responds with the comparison of a bus about to fall off a cliff. They are all passengers inside the bus, so they help each other. The girl finds this comparison strange but understands it, deciding that it's better to be his friend than his enemy. Later, we see the leader of the knights and the remaining knight. They have found the carriage in the crime scene. They lament allowing that to happen and fear being punished by the king, who entrusted them with that mission. They send a messenger pigeon to notify the king, as planned by the protagonist. When they do, Kahabal appears and kills the other knight, leaving the leader alone on his side. She reveals that everything was a deception and that the condemned are alive. He tries to defend himself, realizing his life is in danger, but she cuts off his limbs. He speaks his last words, expressing his desire for peace, but Kahabal ends his life. After that, a man in a fully covered suit arrives before the king, the messenger. He delivers the news brought by the bird. They agree not to rescue the 2 survivors, thus granting victory to our protagonist's group. The man in the suit also suggests that the heroes might be a threat, prompting the king to order finding a way to kill them. The messenger agrees, showing a blue mark on his forehead. The protagonist and the girls are planning to leave, considering taking everything they can, regardless of whether it's part of the mission, as they are uncertain. Next, we see Shindou and her 2 companions, Group A, arriving at a village. They still lack any information about the transportation of goods and ponder where else to search. While Hakozaki was contemplating, he comes up with another conclusion about what it might mean. On the other hand, the protagonist and the other girls, Group B, are getting ready to travel. Yuka decides to ride a horse instead of being inside the carriage, a decision Kahabal sees as risky. Yuka comes to the realization that she likes the protagonist and that's why she wants to be close to him. As they continue their journey, they pause for a moment, and Kahabal approaches the protagonist, seemingly about to say something. However, seeing the child nearby, she decides to save her words for later. Yuka witnesses this from afar and confirms that she also likes the protagonist and was about to confess at that moment. Hence, later on, she decides to ride the horses with the child, giving them privacy inside the carriage. When she peeks inside, she notices that the 2 of them are just resting and not talking. After stopping to cook something, Yuka plans to have the 2 of them cook together to create an opportunity to talk. However, Kahabal hunts a boar, leaving Yuka without a chance to talk to the protagonist. She doesn't manage to do it after dinner either. Seeing her plans fail, she decides to have them practice with swords to see if they can talk now, claiming they need to practice before parting with Kahabal. The protagonist starts practicing with the girl, but just when she was excited about confessing, Kahabal invites her to practice instead. The journey continues, and Yuka laments as her romantic plans have failed. She throws a tantrum on her own, and the protagonist and the child look at her, wondering what's going on. On another path, Hakozaki stops a carriage and notices they are transporting goods to the city they are heading to. She and her companions believe they have found their target. One of the drivers resists, but Shindou overpowers him with her sword and forces him to get out of the carriage with the cargo, or what they think are the goods they are looking for. Later at night, we see Yuka once again looking at the campfire, realizing her efforts for Kahabal to confess were in vain, and she decides to rest. Kahabal approaches the protagonist and sits next to him. With a lot of embarrassment, she tells him that she has something to reveal and prepares to do so. Kahabal thanks him for helping avenge her comrade, which is what she needed to tell him. They have a heartfelt conversation, and Yuka, who overhears them, is disappointed as she thought it was about love. The next day, we see Shindou and her companions carrying the loads, just like the protagonist and his group. Yotsuya arrives in the city and hands over the religious people first. The mission isn't marked as completed. Then he hands over the belongings, and still, nothing happens. Shindou and her team also arrive and notice that suddenly the mission is marked as completed. This is because the protagonist and the girls have delivered the third thing they had, the knight's heads, which turn out to be the goods. When they leave the city, they reunite with Shindou, Hakozaki, and the child, who have just arrived. They plan to separate to finish what's left. After that, we see the protagonist on top of a mountain, observing the city from above and realizing that he has a beautiful view of everything from there. Since they have already completed the first mission given to them by the game master by delivering the knight's heads, they now only have to finish covering 5% of the territory. This task seems easy to him as they split up to cover more ground. However, just as he thinks that, he notices snow falling from the sky, obstructing the proper completion of the mission. Later, in an inn, we see Kahabal looking out the window at the snow, lost in thought. Makua, her travel companion, arrives and mentions an upcoming storm. She, however, doesn't pay much attention to what he's saying. Instead, she thinks about the protagonist and their farewell. She recalls the kiss they shared and dismisses it as a mere impulse. Suddenly, she realizes that Makua is talking to her, which she had been ignoring. She apologizes and tells him they're suspending the journey for now and asks him to rest. On the other hand, the protagonist is on the mountain beside a rock, covered in snow and shivering from the cold. He rummages through his inventory for something to wear to keep warm and finds a suit that helps. He decides to keep moving, as he knows that staying still in the cold would be deadly. He also deduces that if he dies from the cold, he probably won't be able to revive since the conditions of freezing wouldn't allow it, much like what happened to the girls when the monster consumed them. Resurrection was possible after death from blows or magical spells. Then there's Yuka, who is also complaining about the cold and stops in place because it's hard for her to keep walking. When she stops, the cold gets worse, and she struggles to continue. Hakozaki is using her shield to protect herself from the snow. As she does, she reflects on the time she arrived in this world and was warmly welcomed by Shindou. She remembers feeling somewhat better there as she didn't have her illness, and she found herself useful to her companions, even if just a little. Next, we see Shindou, wearing her mage outfit, still feeling very cold. She thinks that completing this mission seems impossible. Being alone in the snow, she recalls when she arrived in this world and had to start entirely on her own, discovering it on her own terms. Thinking about how hard it was to lose her friends, who were her strength, she feels a bit sad. Nevertheless, she decides not to give up and keeps fighting, continuing to walk until she stops upon seeing something. Not far away, Hakozaki notices that lifting her legs has become difficult. She tries to continue, but she falls into the snow, succumbing to imminent freezing. She attempts to get up but fails. She starts crying while lying there, saying she doesn't want to give up, until she appears to fall asleep. Later, we see the protagonist walking. He's making a real effort to continue since his leg exercise has left him tired. He checks the map locator and notices that the girls have stopped, so he thinks they might have died. This motivates him even more to keep going, as if he doesn't reach the goal, everyone will die in the real world. Yotsuya continues his journey and suddenly encounters a large white one-eyed monster. Upon seeing it, he attacks it. The protagonist can't believe it's real, but he joins in the fight against the monster, searching for its weak point. When he finds it, he manages to strike and kill it, although the monster nearly kills him too. He wonders why the attack occurred when there's nobody else around. 3 baby monsters emerge from the area, crying at the sight of their dead parent. This emotionally affects the protagonist, who feels sorry for them. However, he admits that it's not his problem and that these monsters are virtual anyway. Steps ahead, focused on his goal, he falls into a large hole. As he plummets, he can only hope he won't die upon impact. In an instant, a notification appears, indicating that he has died. In another scene, we see 2 girls dressed in vibrant colors, ready for battle. Then, a tall man arrives who they call the Demon King. He attacks them with all his might, managing to defeat one of them and encasing her in a bubble. The other girl doesn't give up. Instead, she decides to keep fighting and summons a power that ultimately defeats the Demon King. This is part of an animated series that Yuka has been watching since she was a child. These 2 girls are her role models and have motivated her to fight her childhood fears. We then see her explaining how these girls helped her inside a snow igloo, using her fire magic staff to stay warm. Later, we see Yotsuya lying in a type of cave. He's surprised to realize he's still alive, as he thought that time he would actually die, assuming his companions had also died. With what little strength he has left, he decides to get up and continue investigating, realizing he has fallen into what seems to be a secret dungeon. While testing one path, he realizes it's a dead end, so he decides to try another. At that moment, he receives a notification that Hakozaki has died. Later, we see Hakozaki's body in the snow, and her spirit is next to her, waiting for her to revive. However, she can't come back due to the surrounding snow. When Shindou realizes her friend has died, she gets up and decides to keep walking to rescue Hakozaki. She notices distant lights, which fills her with hope. As she walks towards the lights, she hears a sound. The ground is breaking. She gets scared, and before she can escape, a hole opens beneath her, and she falls into the icy water. The protagonist receives the notification of his companion's death. He must hurry to leave the place alive as soon as possible and help them. Suddenly, while in one of those dead-end alleys, he notices something emerging from the ground. It's a ground worm, which doesn't harm him but instead burrows back into the ground, creating a tunnel. The protagonist seizes the opportunity to escape through that path. Clearing the debris, he follows the insect, but suddenly, he senses something following him, another worm, this one preying on humans. Yotsuya runs to escape this situation. Yuka starts walking again, thinking that now only she and the protagonist can move forward. But she receives a notification that the boy has died, making her feel even lonelier than before. Disheartened, she decides to stay and die there. However, when she does, she starts seeing her childhood animated series characters, who motivate her to keep going. Yuka stands up and continues her path, very excited, imagining the characters from the series and a boy she liked from the same show. Suddenly, she realizes she's very close to completing the mission and sees a girl mage with a giant cat in front of her. The girl offers her help to reach the destination, so Yuka rides with her on the cat, and they start flying. As the time is about to run out, she realizes they are also close to reaching the goal. She closes her eyes, eager to finally finish this. Suddenly, we see the protagonist and the other girls alive, realizing someone has completed the mission. When they look ahead, they see that it's Yuka, which surprises them, coming from her. Game Master appears once more, asking Yuka to pose her question, to which she's entitled. After a moment of thought, she finally asks if this is truly a virtual world. Game Master remains silent for a moment and then surprisingly responds that it's not. He explains it's an alternate world. He mentions the existence of many such worlds, revealing that they're facing a multiverse. He also explains that all the people and monsters in that place are real, and the only virtual ones are them, the players. Upon hearing this, the protagonist is horrified, realizing that he has actually killed real people, thinking they were all virtual. Yotsuya appears in his room, just like the last time he was transported. He gets up, still unable to believe that he actually killed someone, even if it was from another world. He tries to sleep as he feels a strange sensation inside him. The next day, we see the protagonist playing on the court with other boys, and his performance is unlike ever before, as he's now improved his endurance and all qualities thanks to the other world he had been in. Shindou and Hakozaki are also there, watching him. They discuss how odd the protagonist has been acting and come to the conclusion that it's because he killed someone, thinking that it was a virtual world. The protagonist leaves feeling bad still, but then he receives an email from Game Master asking him how he feels about knowing he actually killed someone. He doesn't respond and goes back home, sitting on his bed, lamenting again. However, he notices a girl there and asks her who she is, very surprised. The girl asks him the same question he received in the email earlier, confirming that she's Game Master. The protagonist responds that he feels guilty and that if he could, he would go back in time to undo what he did. Game Master then gives him a new mission, and they leave together, arriving at a restaurant. There, the girl explains that a man along with others will enter soon, intending to kill a man sitting there. A moment later, the men enter, and the protagonist stops them, preventing the murder of an innocent man. Afterward, a hefty mobster enters the establishment and interrogates the protagonist. He pulls out a gun and aims it at the protagonist, prompting Game Master to give him a glove. The protagonist uses it to generate biological magic, immobilizing the mob boss. Following that, the protagonist goes to the rooftop with the girl, who asks him how he feels now that he prevented a killing. Yotsuya responds, reflecting on the significance of his actions and the value of life. Game Master becomes thoughtful, analyzing his words. On the other hand, we see Shindou talking to some girls, and they mention that they arrested an armed person and prevented a murder. Hakozaki is at her house, and her mother tells her about the murder incident, but it doesn't seem to surprise her much after what she experienced in the other world. Lastly, we see Yuka recording videos for the internet. When she watches the news, she learns about how they prevented a murder. Later, we see the protagonist again with Game Master, who questions his perception of others' lives. He mentions the protagonist's delusions of grandeur and discusses other matters. However, upon recalling the things he's done for others, the protagonist states that he fights for the justice he believes in and will always continue to do so. And that's how the first season of this anime ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it this far. So comment the word million in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.